Not a matter of if, but when crisis will rock your world. I'm Roshini Rajkumar, crisis strategist, licensed attorney, and host of The Crisis Files. We're on location at Mall of America, one of the biggest retail and entertainment destinations in the world. We appreciate MOA's partnership over the last 2 years, and especially for hosting us today. You know them as two members of my crisis squad. Jen Hellman is CEO of GovPublic and a sought-after reputation specialist. Steve Silton is a shareholder at Cozen O'Connor, a law firm headquartered in Philadelphia. What a whirlwind this thing we called 2024. Jen, Steve, and I are going to share some predictions for 2025 in the case file I call Hot Takes. All right, Jen, you're going to kick us off. You've got some predictions for 2025.
I come at this from the standpoint of somebody who works in media relations. I train CEOs. I'm thinking all the time how companies are going to show up and what their reputations are going to be. And so as I'm thinking about where are we going to see crises and blunders in 2025, I think a lot of it could be attributed to our growing reliance on artificial intelligence. More people are learning how to use it, more companies are taking it to the next level, and people are using it to craft messages that don't always get checked. Even the media is doing this. So I think we're going to probably see plenty of blunders this year that are created by AI and not checked by humans before they get out there on social media and in the general media. The other thing that we're seeing is the continuing decline of the media industry. This is happening across all levels, but specifically in local units of government. Every single day there's a small newspaper that's closing, and it's getting harder and harder to get information, and the media plays a really important role. You think about when you're covering city council hearings and meetings of counties and decisions that are going to impact people's day-to-day decisions, we have fewer and fewer ways to get this information. I was thinking, even as I was doing research for my down ballot races, trying to get information about my local candidates when we no longer have a local paper was almost impossible. So this is going to continue to have a ripple effect of people figuring out where do you get information and who is holding government accountable when there are fewer and fewer people to cover the news. I know a lot of people like to talk about media bias, and certainly we could argue about that all day, but one bias that I know the media has for sure is towards controversy. The media loves controversy, and we are going to have plenty of it to cover in the next year. So pay attention to what's getting covered. And also the other bias that the media has is towards wanting to cover things fairly, which usually means you have one person on one side and then you talk to another person on the other side and you've called that fair. However, there's probably 4 or 5 different perspectives that you'd really need to understand in order to understand an issue. So we all get caught in this. One of the fun things to do is, if you have a friend who has a different set of political beliefs than you do, ask them to see their social media feeds, and you will see an entirely different set of messages from the media and from America than what you are reading yourself. Challenge yourself not to get caught in your own echo chamber. We know that the media is biased. We know that there are some media that are more Democrat, more Republican. Make yourself read both sides of it to truly understand what's going on. And lastly, I think this is really interesting because I do a lot of training of CEOs to get up and to talk to the media, and the advice that we give them over and over: be really clear about your message. Don't overshare. Use only fact-based information. The incoming president had an entirely different way of being a spokesperson. And I think that it's changing the way that people show up, both leaders in politics and leaders in business. And I think we should look to see whether this is a trend that continues or whether we might start to see a pendulum swing in another direction. So just something interesting to watch.
Some real interesting hot takes from Jen Hellman. What I would say is that media piece definitely is of interest. I love that you're making some predictions for 2025 on that. As a former TV reporter, as someone who's bringing the crisis files to people, I mean, when I was a TV reporter, I needed to be that neutral. I still am very down the middle when it comes to politics. As a talk show host, I can share opinion, but what I want to really point out is we need to be questioning, first and foremost, right in the newsrooms, who's managing those newsrooms? Are they unbiased? Are they making sure they're teaching their journalists, in some cases young journalists, to go out and get the various perspectives? And then when perspectives clash, how are they going to report that? Are they going to say, well, here, this is what about 50% of the people we talked with said? I mean, how are they going to do that? So even before we can get to the politics of the coverage, it's more, how is it being conducted? Is it journalistic? I tend to hop around and I watch and read all different kinds of sources, but that's probably my nature as a former TV journalist. Everyone needs to do that, but we also need to be really demanding of newsrooms, not the talk show opinion people, but newsrooms that are supposed to be doing objective and what I call journalism. So if you see something that's inaccurate, write that, it's so easy. Just go on their social pages and point out you had an inaccurate fact. So as soon as the public stops holding the media accountable, then the media sometimes, especially the journalists, get a little more loose.
That's great advice. And in order to do that, one thing you have to do, though, is read beyond the headline. And we are a society of headline readers. We're all scanning our phones and just reading a headline or maybe the first couple of paragraphs. That is not going to get us to the truth. So really challenge yourself to not only look for media in different places, but read all the way to the end. Because if we do have reporters doing their job and covering multiple opinions and perspectives, we also, as consumers of that news, have to be willing to get all the way to the end.
I have a question. So how do you message if you're trying to get a message across in the age of these algorithms? In other words, where the messages are really being targeted to confirm the bias of a consumer. How do you get beyond those algorithms, break those algorithms, and get your message across to a broader audience?
Well, I mean, it's pretty much impossible. Paid posts, right, on social media will allow you to break through some of that. But the media falls victim to the same thing that corporations are doing. The media needs people to click on their headlines. I mean, how many times have you clicked on a headline, gone into the story, and been a little bit disappointed because the story was not nearly as interesting as the headline? It's all a matter of getting it to, Steve, to your point, to rise up in the algorithms, and it's difficult to do because that's usually things that are sensational, using words that are more trigger words. And that's not necessarily what we want when we're trying to teach people about multiple perspectives and understanding that the world isn't black and white, the world is gray.
Right, and that's why it is called clickbait. I mean, they are baiting you, so just think about that. They want you to click. They don't necessarily care if they're getting a little loose with the words they're using in the headline because they're saying, oh, well, the story will be accurate. Well, you got to be ethical from the beginning. All right, Steve, your hot takes for 2025.
Well, this was a fun assignment, Roshini, because usually I deal with kind of micro issues, identifying potential risk for client, not kind of looking on a more holistic country.
But that's why we count on you also for the crisis files, because you do get right down to the problem that's like so tiny but could really screw up a company.
Yes, and so here I get to kind of look at this in a more kind of global level, so it was kind of fun. And the first hot take I have is that if RFK Jr. is indeed confirmed as the head of Health and Human Services for the first time in really a century since vaccines have become a thing, we're going to have an anti-vaxxer in that position. And what my thought is that he's not going to eliminate vaccinations, but he's going to essentially, and he's going to describe it this way, empower parents to make choices for their children's vaccines.
And not just have to take it. What's the expression? All
mandatory, yes.
Exactly.
You're not going to have
Mandatory,
mandatory vaccines with limited opt-outs for people who have religious exemptions. You're going to allow parents to opt out of vaccinations for any reason, for just kind of their overall belief in the efficacy and the safety of vaccines. And what that could do is run it right into a conflict with public schools. Because, we don't have this in our lifetime, but polio outbreaks were so serious, they actually shut down public schools, they shut down parks and public pools, and there was a substantial crisis. And there might be issues where the schools are like, listen, you can choose to not vaccinate your child, but we're going to choose not to admit your child. And that is going to be a kind of a state's rights, even a city rights, a school district rights issue as it relates to kind of the constitutional rights of our citizens. The second is more of a kind of an urban issue. I think the commercial real estate market is going to stay depressed. I see it locally as well as nationally. And I think there's going to be a substantial rethinking of what people want from downtowns. We talked about the difference in generations, and our younger generations have very different expectations and demands on what they want from downtowns. It goes beyond just sporting events and theater. It relates to how they interact and the way they travel. A lot of them don't own cars. And I think there's going to be a substantial amount of innovation in that space. And I think our downtowns are going to look different in 4 to 6 years, frankly, than they do today.
Which kind of brings us back to the lesson we teach people on the Crisis Files, that when there's a major problem, that's that opportunity for innovation or for rethinking or just for better solutions.
Yes, and I see that on a micro level. I see a number of my clients redoing their commercial space. I was just at actually a holiday party for a client last Thursday, and all of the executive offices were interior, all of the outside space were occupied by their support staff and communal space. And this was a very kind of old school type of a business, and they were taking a very progressive new school approach. And I think that's just one example. You're going to see a whole bunch more of that. And finally, this is a hot take, and it's somewhat of a prediction, and we'll see if it actually comes to be, where Donald Trump, and this doesn't relate to politics, more in his personal life, has gone through life settling scores and essentially, getting back at people who slighted him in the past. And one of the biggest untold stories of Donald Trump was his foray into professional football and the founding of the USFL and his attempt to exit the USFL into the NFL, essentially fold the USFL as part of litigation, long-time litigation, between the USFL and the NFL, and out of that litigation get an NFL franchise. And the then commissioner of the NFL, Pete Rozelle, made it very public. He's like, Donald Trump will never be an owner of an NFL franchise. Now Donald Trump is president again. He is a lame duck president, no longer confined by the obligation to run for office. And I think he's going to go about settling scores. And will he personally go to war with the NFL? And will Donald Trump going to war with 32 billionaires, how will that look like? There's a lot of ways he could do that. He could do it in public safety. He could do it in a monopoly, which was how he originally litigated the USFL case. But it could be incredibly interesting and entertaining.
Wow, that's a very stunning prediction and could actually be a really great case file on the Crisis Files if we see some of your prediction coming out in 2025.
Yeah, no.
Dig into it even further.
And there might be a need for lawyers too, so.
A need for lawyers, a need for crisis experts. There's always a need, and that's where we dig in. The Crisis Files does its best when people are digging into controversy, looking for better solutions and more innovation. All right, so here are some of my predictions. Love for your takes on this. Betty White. You know her as an icon in entertainment, acting. I think she became everyone's grandma. She died in 2021 at the age of 99. And I think much like Mickey Mouse, she was beloved. Maybe not as many people knew her as Mickey Mouse, but pretty close. Well, guess what? She's getting her own stamp. It's coming out in 2025. And I mean, would you buy a Betty White stamp, Steve?
What are stamps?
Okay. I still mail thank you notes.
Yeah, no, I'm just...
There is still an art to writing a letter.
There is.
Or writing a thank you, and Roshini, you do that very well.
Yes,
Well,
that's
thank
very
you.
true. Yes,
but most communication strategists would tell you a thank you note goes a long way.
That's right.
And for that, you need a stamp. And why not the Betty White stamp?
And I thought the Betty White thing was interesting because she's just so beloved.
Yes.
And is that why we're picking her? Because she makes us feel good and safe, kind of like warm chocolate
She
cookies?
was beloved, however, she was also kind of a naughty grandma because she would make dirty jokes and she would do funny things in different movies. Did you ever see The Proposal with Ryan Reynolds? That was a funny movie. She was the grandma. All right, so the reason I put this on my hot takes for 2025, as great as she is on her own, it really opens up the question for me about Hollywood in general, Hollywood icons, and I think influence is going to be reimagined. We've seen it for different things we know of, the Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift romance that's now kind of getting a little out of control. Even Kansas City fans are texting me and saying, I'm just sick of this. And we've also just seen other situations where the gravitas of a celebrity didn't help a political figure or didn't help a cause or maybe even got them in trouble. So I think the world is going to reimagine what it wants from its celebrities and celebrity culture.
The concept of celebrity is obviously changing dramatically, right? Hollywood doesn't necessarily make the celebrities. They're able to kind of make their own profile online. You only have to look as far as the fight on Friday, Jake Paul. Jake Paul was a YouTube sensation, right? Who now has essentially turned himself into kind of a boxing promoter and kind of a fighter, I guess.
And played Mike Tyson, beat Mike Tyson. He's 30 years younger. And so that brought up a whole other layer that's learning about Mike Tyson if you didn't know Mike Tyson before.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of Hollywood might change dramatically. I think it already has changed, right? The studio system obviously was the original Hollywood. That changed to independent actors. And now they no longer even need the production companies and directors as much. They can essentially be their own private celebrities.
I can't wait to watch and see what happens with that prediction. And of course, we'll talk with our regular entertainment contributor, Paul McGuire-Grimes, as we always do on those Hollywood topics. My number 2 hot take is this topic of neurodiversity, sometimes labeled autism spectrum, and also ADHD. I believe it's going to ascend even more into the global narrative. So many of us have heard about people being adult diagnosed ADHD, adult diagnosed autistic, and it's also made places like US Bank Stadium have spaces that are quiet spaces for people who have hearing, they get distracted by a lot of noise or different things like that. And I'm sure MOA is considering those kinds of things in how it lays out its spaces in this very large entertainment facility. So that, I think, is going to be hot. I think people are going to be out there wanting to educate more, because I will tell you firsthand, you know someone who is neurodiverse. You love someone who is neurodiverse. So the more we understand it, the better it will be for the world. And my final prediction for 2025 is a gender reckoning. I believe not only the generational divide will be part of that, but pay equity and the language we used. I don't know, Jen, if you saw on social media after Donald Trump got elected, and that's just the time frame of it. I don't know if that was the specific cause, but it might have been. A bunch of people in America, there are headlines on CNN, women in America are going the way of this trend in South Korea of women refusing to have babies, refusing to have sex with men. And I'm like, wait, why would you forsake your own sexual pleasure because of how the United States election turned out? I mean, this just doesn't make sense to me. But that's just one example of the gender reckoning that the United States is going through, and most likely even the whole world.
Well, true. I mean, I don't know about the previous topic, but
Jen's a little speechless, which
yes.
Steve pretty much never happens.
Yes, Roshini does that to
I'm
me
definitely
frequently.
not commenting on that one.
Yeah.
Let's be very clear.
But absolutely there will be. I mean, of course, we have been fighting for women's rights for as long as I've been on this earth, and we have made significant progress. I think certainly there are concerns that there could be some type of a setback. We have not yet elected a woman president, and I think we can question whether we were ready for it as a society. But I think there's also this thing going on where we can't penalize men. And I think that's a real risk. We have to find a way to start getting along, both on the political sides, men and women, the generations. We have a lot of difference right now in our world, and I think a good key to that is good communication, right? Learning how to be open to other perspectives, truly trying to understand what other people think, and not necessarily trying to get everybody to think what you believe. But it would be great if in 2025 we could spend a lot more time listening to each other than talking.
That is a really great way to say it. So some hot takes, excited to look in when we get into 2025, what will become case files on the crisis files from our hot takes. Well, Steve, Jen, thank you so much for being at Mall of America with me on location for the first time with the show and covering some really great grounds. I love your predictions. I love the thought you put into them, and I can't wait to see if they turn out. All right, be sure to follow Jen Hellman and Steve Silton on LinkedIn. Follow the show on YouTube, X, and Instagram at The Crisis Files. Rate, review, and subscribe to The Crisis Files on your platform of choice. Check out our website, thecrisisfiles.com. I'm Roshini Rajkumar. Thanks, Mall of America, for having us. Remember MOA for your own special family events and when you want to make a splash with a company offsite. Join me next time on The Crisis Files.